they're barred, the NCAA is, from enforcing NIL rules under an injunction granted by a federal judge. What does this mean in a nutshell?
All right. So probably less chaos than you think, but still a lot of chaos. So the court's ruling is actually limited to athletes in Tennessee and Virginia. Those were the states that brought the lawsuit. So right now they're at like a huge competitive advantage recruiting wise. Now, it doesn't mean that the NCAA is probably going to try to enforce these laws against schools in other states, but technically the only schools right now with an absolute free pass are Virginia and Tennessee. And it's not all NIL. It's just two narrow categories of the NIL rules, the rules that prohibit collectives from talking to high school recruits and recruits in the portal. Now, I think everybody knows that recruits in the portal already have a pretty good sense of what a school is going to pay them in NIL. I don't think that's going to change college football very much. I think where we're really going to see it is at the high school level, because I know collectives have sort of enjoyed the fact that they can focus their NIL resources on existing players. I mean, we know that there's been like inducement-like situations already. It just hasn't been like all that out in the open, but I do think collectives are going to have to divert more resources to high school players. I think that is going to make recruiting even more challenging for college coaches. It gets messier and messier.
Let me ask you this before Smitty jumps in. So doesn't those two states and schools have a huge advantage right now?
Yes and no. I think technically yes, because they know they absolutely can operate with immunity right now. There was another thing that I don't know, most people haven't been talking about this, but the NCAA has this super messed up rule called the rule of restitution. I don't know if you guys have heard of that. Basically, it says that if a court enjoins the NCAA from enforcing its rules, like has happened here, issues a preliminary injunction, but hasn't issued its like final conclusion yet. And then then you act, right? Say you engage in this recruiting behavior, and then later the court either reverses or vacates its order. The NCAA, the rule says the NCAA can issue punishment that's way worse than the initial punishment would have been. So they can like strip individual athletes of stats, records. They can impose all kinds of crazy stuff. And this court said, you can't enforce this rule of restitution if later we reverse course on this, and you can't enforce or penalize any recruiting of high school athletes or portal athletes by collectives during this time. So I don't know, to the extent they're at a big advantage, yes, and that they know they're not going to get caught. They know they're not going to be retroactively punished for anything they do right now. But as a practical matter, I'm guessing other schools are looking at this and saying we could go out and get the same injunction in our state too. So I don't think the NCAA is going to be cracking the whip on this.
This is going on too in Texas. They're trying to modify its NIL law in the wake of this ruling. So the NCAA can enforce its rule that prohibits prospective college athletes from entering into NIL deals. We just saw the Ole Miss quarterback signed the first lucrative private jet deal. Like now this guy, Jackson Dart, former USC guy, goes out and gets a private jet deal now. Like, is this spiraling out of control in our front of our very eyes, or in your opinion, is it going to be too uncontrollable here in a second? Because Michelle, not to cut you off, but if we don't have a governing body and a commissioner, who's monitoring what I'm giving let's say my backup quarterback at Michigan? Who's monitoring? How do you know I'm not giving this guy $1 million that just to keep quiet and stay on the low and stay here and be the starter in the 2 years when no one really knows about him? There's a lot of that type of shit going on right now, according to a lot of buddies of mine coaching D1, and they saying it's so shady that no one's going to be able to track it.
Yeah, no, I'm sure that that's going on everywhere. And I think with each new lawsuit that's filed against the NCAA and with this new order. So even though this order was only about a narrow set of rules, what it does signify is that the NCAA's power is eroding day by day, right? And if there had been a different NIL law or rule challenge, the court probably would have struck that down too, because all of this is on such legally thin ice. But to your point, the courts, they can only strike rules down. They can't make new ones. And so what we're left with until the NCAA steps up and does something is that all the existing rules are just getting shot down left and right. Nobody thinks that they are credible anymore. And then it's chaos. And I think it's going to be chaos for a long time until the NCAA gets hit with probably a large monetary judgment or is facing the prospect of $1 billion judgment in one of these 6 or 7 lawsuits that's pending. And they have to make a change. But frankly, I don't know why they haven't already. Like, it's just getting so bad. The situation is insane. They're focused on super dumb stuff, like whether you can decorate a student's room.
Oh, yeah.
Like
that's crazy. Like, I'm trying to like think about like who's the committee that's just sitting around just thinking about stuff like that. Like, you know what, hey, you can't decorate a recruit's room. Like, why? Why does that even matter? And it's, for too long, NCAA has cared about things that just did not matter. Me as a former college athlete at Ball State playing in the MAC, I should have not been concerned when a damn, a scout or whatever you want to call it, a former alum bought me Olive Garden one time. I shouldn't have been nervous about that. Like, it's like little things like that I could have gotten in trouble for. It should never have been that way. And I don't feel bad for the NCAA. And it kind of goes to your point you made in the summer, JB, about this thing turning to a point to where these conferences, the SEC specifically, is going to kind of separate themselves and kind of create their own, basically entity in a sense, right? And it will no longer be an NCAA.
Michelle, let me ask you a legal question. How, because you just kind of alluded to it. How does, let's say the Power Five that will be, I believe it's going to be the South, like the SEC is going to combine eventually with the Big 10 or Big 12. Right. And then you'll have the West Coast combine with, you'll get these teams out here like San Diego State, UNLV, Colorado State, Air Force. You're going to get all these different teams. Maybe even Notre Dame gets thrown in the mix because they're going to be left out of the new 12-team playoff rule. If this is, on the same trajectory, how does those teams legally get out of the NCAA as their governing body? Because I believe it's coming. And I think that these guys, especially the SEC, once out, Greg Sankey, I believe, will be the commissioner if it does happen. They'll get out of the NCAA's complete control here in the next few years, in my opinion. Legally, how does that happen?
I think there are probably contractual relationships governing them right now, but the NCAA derives all of its power from its members, right? It's one of those things that they're powerful because everybody says they're powerful, and once everybody says they're not powerful, they lose that. So I would have to further explore what the legal basis would be for them to sort of secede from the NCAA, but I don't think right now there's much stopping them from, because the other thing is you can breach contracts, like
right.
You can. There's a concept in law called an efficient breach where it makes more sense economically to get out of the contract and pay the damages than to stay in it. We may see that coming, especially if the NCAA may no longer exist. Honestly, these lawsuits are like nuclear bombs. Like any single one of them could destroy the NCAA. Some of the Power Five conferences have been named in these lawsuits too, but the NCAA may just cease to exist because of how it's operating and the fact that it's really operating illegally.
If that does happen, like, again, me going to like a smaller Division I school, I guess it makes me a little nervous, right? That like a lot of these like MAC schools, Buffalo, Western Michigan, Eastern Michigan, Ball State, like, will they no longer exist in terms of like having major like football programs and basketball programs if these Power 5, divisions come together, NCAA diminishes? Like, how do you guys foresee that happening? Like the effect of this happening on these smaller schools?
It's going to be really tricky, right? I think one thing that may be problematic is if the NCAA waits and then courts deem student athletes employees, and all of a sudden a college has to pay minimum wage to every single one of its athletes because of the degree to which it exerts control over them. They just can't afford to do that, right? And that's not fair to students who want to play and would play for free, because there are obviously other benefits to college athletics than just getting paid. But in the absence of real rulemaking to try to get around that, I think a lot of these programs are in jeopardy, men's and women's athletics.